Thank you so much again for joining me to continue to explore this journey of understanding thoughts, their connection to stress and suffering, and how do we break these cycles. In a previous session, we have explored briefly what thoughts really are from a science perspective. And an individual thought does not carry that much weight. It really is just a neural impulse. But when we continue to repeatedly think the same thoughts or proliferate those thoughts into stories and continue to ruminate about them, especially when we get lost in the story of the past and the future, which we often do, then we create neural highways almost, very solid places. So you can think of the first few thoughts as a small trail in a park. And then if you repeatedly continue to think that same way over time, over years sometimes, they become like national highways. And they become what in science is called the default mode network, meaning that the brain will go back to those ways of thinking and actions that are most familiar to it and that are most used. Not necessarily the most useful, but the most used. So, what happens in terms of neuroscience is we often talk about neurons that fire together, wire together. And we have to become very careful about our thinking process because the thinking eventually translates to action, and repeated action becomes a habit, and repeated habits then become a way of behavioral thinking, and our character and our life is then formed that way. So how we think is crucial. Now, one of the things that is really interesting about thinking is we often have this phenomena of what is attributed to the Buddha, the story of the two arrows. So the idea was that, someone was walking in the jungle and got shot by a poisoned arrow. And instead of actually taking the arrow out and getting help and healing, if the person starts to have this big question of, first tell me who shot the arrow, what was the arrow made of, where did the poison come from, what kind of person would have done this, let me take revenge on this person. By the time you finish this thinking process, perhaps the person would have died. So what is required is an immediate action to alleviate the suffering in the first arrow, but instead what happens is we get lost in the reactivity. So the first arrow is often thought of as the primary suffering. It's the initial stressor. This is a real thing. It can be a real point of contact, of suffering, of pain. And you can, of course, acknowledge that this is not pleasant. You don't have to like it, but that's it. The next moment, something else could be showing up that could be wonderful, and you are open to that. What happens when we get lost in the stories, in the questioning of that first stressor, the primary suffering, is that we get wrapped up in the reactivity of all of that emotional turbulence, and stories of anger and frustration and many other feelings come up, and we can continue to fall into a loop of many, many more arrows and sufferings caused by the secondary stories that we get wrapped up in. So what is a solution, you might ask? So let me take you through a very quick exercise taught to me by Mingyur Rinpoche, He has a very simple invitation. He says, let's practice not thinking about pizza. Don't think about pizza. Anything else but pizza. Okay? No pizza. What happens? For most of us with an untrained mind, you probably thought about a pizza. So there is a saying in neuroscience that goes, whatever you resist persists. And this is a really important thing to understand. We often try to force and judge and try to fight whatever is here already in our life. We'd rather have it some other way. That is actually the root of stress. We are unhappy with the way things are unfolding, and we would like it to be some other way. But the very first piece of change is that we actually have to turn towards what is here instead of resisting it, fighting it. Understand that it has come to be because of a range of conditions that have come in the past. It's not that things have just created themselves out of nowhere. So we must understand that whatever shows up in our life, how we react to it, is a product of conditioning and perceptions, and how even our families, our histories might have conditioned us to react in a particular way. But we can break this cycle of continuing to amplify stress. When we stress about stress, when we resist stress, when we fight it, we only amplify it. But when we meet stress, meet stressful thoughts with understanding, with openness, with curiosity, and accept it before we can change it. This is how it is in this moment. It's not our fault. It has come to be this way because of a range of conditions that had happened. Now, how can we meet the next moment wisely? The first step to changing something is to accept that it is the way it is first. Then you can start to understand, is this helpful or not helpful to me right now? And what might be a wiser way to meet it? So, openness and curiosity first, investigating it to start to understand it. That is your first step. Even before that, you can start to understand that how you are reacting to something is because there is a protection mechanism built into you. You are trying to protect. Stress is nothing but fear. We have learned this. Cortisol is a fear hormone. Previous sessions have really explored this in detail. Now I really invite you to understand what we do out of fear is really nothing but a protection mechanism that is not always helpful. It may have helped when you were a child, perhaps, but it no longer is serving you and perhaps is now depleting you even more. So I will invite you in the next few sessions to explore this a little bit deeper. But for now, the invitation is simply to start to ask the question, is my reaction or response to something serving me or depleting me, hurting me? Am I feeling more stressed about a situation after thinking about it? And is it showing up in the body in the form of tightness, in the form of having more anxiety and depression? So if these are true, it might be helpful for you to just practice some simple mindfulness, allowing you to just take a break from the thinking process and come into the present moment, just breaking the cycle and the loop of infinite thinking might be very helpful. And we do this very simply with just a few breaths. Don't take it on as a big project. Just simply come into the present moment. Take a deep breath. Soften and release. There is a very scientific reason why just the breath and a long exhale out is so helpful as an antidote to stress. And the simple reason is, in the middle of a fight, you just can't afford to take a deep breath. So this ability to just take a deep, long inhale and an even longer exhale out as you drop your shoulders, soften your belly, and release your body, tells the brain in this moment there is no fight. And it allows your hormones, especially your cortisol, to just drop a little bit. So I invite you into this very simple practice. Deep breath in and out. And you can always bring your hand to your heart or belly as another way of calming and softening the body and releasing this moment of thinking about stress. Remember, you can always replace a thought, change the channel to something more kind, compassionate, pleasant, and perhaps have a little more humor in your life. Thank you.